Good afternoon to those of you in the East Coast. Good morning to those of you in the West. I'm Charles Gibson at ABC's Washington Bureau. We are interrupting your program just briefly because ABC News has learned that the president, in a speech this afternoon, is going to make a significant announcement about the handling of al-Qaeda detainees, high-profile al-Qaeda leaders that have been arrested and in custody of U.S. officials for some time. But where they were being held and under what conditions has always been a highly guarded secret. ABC's Jonathan Karl at the Pentagon has broken this story, and we're going to go to him now there. John, what is the president going to say? What's happening to these detainees? How many of them are there?
Charlie, there are 14 of these detainees, and these are the worst of the worst, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind architect of the September 11th attacks. They have been held secretly by the Central Intelligence Agency, and they will be transferred. In fact, the transfer has already begun over to the Pentagon and to Guantanamo Bay, where they will be granted, Charlie, the same rights that all other prisoners are granted, including the right to a hearing before a military tribunal.
All right. Do we know why this announcement is being made?
Well, there has been intense pressure on the Bush administration to do something about detainees. There have been Supreme Court decision, the Hamdan decision, about the right to a trial. So there's been a lot of pressure on the administration. This is something they've wanted to do for a long time, but have been unable to come up with the exact mechanism. Now they're coming out with it, and they're saying they're going to Guantanamo.
ABC's Brian Ross. Thanks, Jonathan Karl. ABC's Brian Ross has been reporting on this for more than a year now, talking about secret CIA prisons overseas. Brian, do we know if this is the entire group of high-profile detainees that the CIA has?
Based on what we know, it is, Charlie. There are about 14, as Jonathan reported. They had been held at prisons in Poland and Romania, and then late last year were moved to a location in North Africa and another one in the Middle East. These are people who were given the most extreme interrogation techniques. They, in fact, were told, Charlie, they could write to President Bush. He wanted to hear from them. So they've been busy writing letters to President Bush denouncing him and the United States throughout their time in captivity.
So how significant a change is this, that they're being taken from these secret CIA facilities overseas to Guantanamo?
I think it's very significant. They'll now enter the military judicial system, no longer being held secretly. It's also a tacit admission now by the United States that these prisons did exist. There have been investigations launched in Europe. The U.S. has denied them or has walked around the issue. This essentially confirms what we had been reporting and what the Europeans had suspected.
Yeah, that's an important point. It is a tacit admission, not specific, but a tacit admission that your reporting over the last year has been correct.
That's right. And it's extremely important, and it will be very interesting to see at the point they ever come to trial how they will describe their treatment at the hands of U.S. interrogators.
Well, now, the court, Jonathan Karl just made reference to the Supreme Court decision in the Hamdan case. The court said that they have to be given, if I'm quoting it correctly, that they have to be given the rights under the Geneva Convention, and then would they have to be brought to trial at some point, or could they be held indefinitely?
I believe under the ruling they'd have to be brought to, through the military system of justice. They, we are told, have repeatedly denounced the United States. They've been friendly with their interrogators and said that they would try, if they ever got loose, to kill as many Americans as possible. Particularly Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, throughout his captivity, has maintained an anger and a hatred for the United States that has stunned even the hardened interrogators who dealt with him.
And I want to go also, thanks Brian Ross, want to go also to ABC's George Stephanopoulos, our chief Washington correspondent, because George, there are obvious political implications to this. The president acknowledging something that up until now the government has not acknowledged.
That's right, and a lot of legislative complications and consequences as well, Charlie, because the White House will now be sending up legislation that will be their interpretation of how now these military tribunals can be brought into compliance with the Geneva Conventions. There are likely to be differences with what the House and Senate want to do there, particularly a group of Republican senators led by Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Senator John Warner, who, of course, had opposed the administration on the issue of torture last year. So we're in for a big national security debate, a big debate on how far we have to go in providing the Geneva Convention protections to these prisoners just 61 days before the election.
All right, George, thanks very much. I want to go one time back to Jonathan Karl, because, Jonathan, these are names perhaps that the American public would not recognize, but indeed these are very high-profile, high-level al-Qaeda people that we're talking about.
These are the most senior al-Qaeda leaders that have been caught by the United States. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, as I mentioned, the architect of the 9/11 attacks, but also Abu Zubaydah, Ramzi bin al-Shibh. These are people, maybe not household names, but they were top people very close to Osama bin Laden, really the crown jewels of the military operations that have been conducted in Afghanistan. Now, Charlie, one important point about those trials, the Pentagon today issued a directive saying that all detainees under Pentagon control are granted those Geneva protections, including the right to a hearing before what is called a competent authority. We'll see exactly what the president says about what that authority will be, but essentially they now have the right to a trial.
All right, Jonathan Karl, thanks very much. Brian Ross and George Stephanopoulos. So the president to announce this afternoon that 14 high-level al-Qaeda detainees to be transferred to Guantanamo Bay, put under the control of the military, under the control of the Pentagon, and that obviously will give them greater rights than they have had, many of them now being held by the CIA in secret prisons, tacitly acknowledged by the president for a number of years in some cases. We'll have full details on ABC's World News later this afternoon or later this evening, and obviously you can always get information on this, the latest ABC reporting at abcnews.com. I'm Charles Gibson in Washington. Thanks for being with us. See you later on World News.